Tēnā koutou katoa, ko hikurangi te maunga, ko waiapu te awa, ko ngasi parau te iwi, ko tūwhakairi ora te hapu, ko Adrienne Dawson aho. My name is Adrienne Dawson and I work for the Industry Training Federation, the peak body for the New Zealand Industry Training Organisation, or ITOs. I would just like to say, kei te mihi ki a koe Jan, for your welcome to country. As an Indigenous person of New Zealand, I really appreciate the welcome from the Aboriginal people of this state. The Industry Training Federation, as Craig mentioned, has close ties with NCVER, and we hope in time to partner together to take the No Frills conference to New Zealand. I read with interest the Skilling for Tomorrow paper that is at the centre of the theme for this conference, and the challenges identified were strikingly similar to those we see in New Zealand. We can learn a lot from the studies undertaken in Australia, and I have already been spamming my colleagues' inboxes with the reports and articles mentioned in the Skilling for Tomorrow discussion paper. But today, I'm here to give a brief overview of the industry training system in New Zealand and the rise and fall of apprentices. Here we are. So to begin, the key components of the industry training system are that it is industry-led, that all trainees are in employment, and that industry training organisation, or ITOs, arrange rather than deliver training. Not only do employers have a direct role in setting industry standards, but the workplace is the predominant site of learning, with a much smaller, albeit important role for institutional education providers. ITOs use funding to develop national qualifications and resources, arrange for the assessment and moderation of workplace learning, and when necessary, purchase off-job training. ITOs are not government-owned, nor is the government represented in ITO governance. However, the government investment in ITO-arranged training is based on an agreed investment plan, which demonstrates demand for skills and training in certain areas. The government also administers the national framework of standards and qualifications, and quality assures both the learning and assessment, and also the quality of the organisations themselves, including the effectiveness of ITO governance and giving effect to its legislative responsibilities. Industry training in New Zealand is funded as an industry-government partnership. Government funding is contingent on an industry cash contribution of at least 30%. So, how did we get here? New Zealand introduced legislation covering apprenticeships in 1865, modelled largely on the British system. While the system evolved over time, time-based apprenticeships administered by regional district committees remained right up until the late 1980s. Apprentice numbers throughout the 70s and first half of the 80s remained relatively stable, between 25,000 and 30,000 contracts, before sliding dramatically in the second half of the 1980s as unemployment rose sharply. The New Zealand economy had gone through radical change through the second half of the 80s, and at the same time, the education system underwent a wholesale review. The reviews identified several problems with the traditional apprenticeship system. In particular, the system was thought to be insufficiently responsive to the changing needs of employers and their industries. It lacked coordination. It was limited to traditional trades, and the numbers of employees participating was in decline. Apprenticeship training and the trades were seen as unattractive options for school leavers. The Scottish standards-based assessment system for technical and vocational education was highlighted as a national competency-based model for a wide range of subject areas. The recommendations from this work led to the development of the industry training strategy and the establishment of ITOs under the Industry Training Act of 1992. The primary objective of the New Zealand Industry Training Strategy was to expand systematic industry training beyond the traditional trades and to link industry training to the new National Qualifications Framework. The vehicle for these changes was ITOs, who were charged with developing and maintaining skill standards for industry, administering the delivery of industry training, and developing and improving industry and apprenticeship training. Removing the term apprenticeship from the title of the Industry Training Act was heavily debated. The mission to expand the industry training system into a wider range of industries and a wider range of trainees, young and old, led to a view that the term apprenticeship was constraining. Another unique feature of the system was that ITOs would have purchasing power with providers to deliver off-job components to industry trainees. This provided a direct lever for industry to invest in provision that met its needs. Another significant shift, not necessarily a good one, was to move central agency responsibility for workplace training from labour policy to education policy, with ITOs as the bridge between education and the world of work. Developing competency-based qualifications was a major undertaking for the ITOs, and they realised there would be value in a collective to work with each other on matters of common interest and effective practice. The Industry Training Federation of 40 ITOs at that stage was formed in 1996. By 1998, there were over 45,000 industry trainees, and just 2 years later, there were 85,000. Against a backdrop of a strong economy and skills shortages, in 1999, the incoming Labour coalition government had a clear mandate to bring back the apprenticeship and promptly announced a review of the industry training system. At its heart, the modern apprenticeship proposal tapped into the cry for skills and career security. The average age of apprentices had over time crept above 25, so the program also targeted youth to promote apprenticeships as a valid pathway for school leavers. Politically too, it was a winner, since it tapped into the perception that the National Party had abolished apprenticeships and New Zealand Labour was going to bring them back. The other headline result of the 2000 Industry Training Review was the addition of a third statutory role for ITOs, skilled leadership. These activities included a feedback loop from industry to government on the impact of its investment in skills, a greater focus for ITOs on adult literacy and numeracy, and embedding literacy and numeracy into foundation level programs. More sophisticated labour market analysis, including a matching supply and demand toolkit that mapped the supply of tertiary education to occupations. Cross-industry alliances, most notably alongside Business New Zealand and the New Zealand Council of Trade Unions, and closer work with the school sector, including the development of vocational pathways, which are sector-based pathways connecting school achievements with industry and career pathways. Then 2008 happened. Just 2 years after eclipsing 200,000 trainees, by 2010 the number had almost halved. Numbers coming into training had plummeted, and qualification completion rates had dropped to a dismal 31%. As many industry trainees and apprentices fell victim to the last in, first out approach to layoffs. The government's $180 million industry training budget was slashed by more than a quarter, and a direct transfer to the university sector. Some ITOs lost half of their government funding at a stroke. The dark days had begun. The announcement of the Industry Training Review by the National Government in 2012 came as no surprise. The government audits had uncovered poor systems in some ITOs for managing trainees. Some ITOs were receiving subsidies for inactive trainees, and in 11 cases, for people that turned out to be deceased. There was, quite rightly, an uproar. Perhaps more damning, the killer statistic, repeated publicly and often, was that half of all industry trainees had not gained a single credit the year covered by the audits. The review culminated in a new piece of legislation, the Industry Training and Apprenticeships Act. In substance, it retained the fundamentals of the system, surprisingly, industry-led, outcomes-based, industry training organisations, skill standards, arranging training. The system had been reviewed from top to bottom, and it turned out it wasn't broken. The fundamentals were still sound. Modern apprenticeships were expanded to create a new all-ages apprenticeship scheme, New Zealand Apprenticeships. From a political perspective, it was another chance to claim the return of apprenticeships, especially since the word was back in the title of the main Act of Parliament. By 2013, released figures showed marked improvements in the performance of ITOs. In the wake of the Christchurch earthquakes and improving employment, the needle had swung upwards again in terms of the numbers in the system. But this time, completion rates were healthier, 74%. To improve performance during this period of change was a major achievement, and ITOs could be proud. By 2014, government was publicly congratulating the rationalised ITO sector for further improvements in both participation and performance. A smaller number, 11, of larger organisations were delivering better services for trainees and employers. Today, the industry training and apprenticeship sector is in good heart. Participation is up and performance is significantly up. The call to bring back apprenticeships is certainly part of the New Zealand story, but also internationally. Many governments are responding to a sense that apprenticeships are a good thing, but somehow got lost. There are currently deliberate policy efforts in many countries to revitalise and increase the number of apprenticeships and workplace learning in general. The global financial crisis delivered a cohort of young people that have had the hardest time in many generations in making successful transitions to the workplace. We call this employment scarring. The other force at work is qualification inflation, resulting in a form of productivity drag, which keeps people out of the labour force for longer, then fails to match them with employment in line with their qualifications, let alone their aspirations. Rapid technological change presents challenges for educational institutions to match their offerings to the world of work. And the robots are here. Automation is becoming prevalent in many areas of industry, and predicting future skill needs is a challenging exercise. Apprenticeships, by their very nature, overcome several of these challenges. The employment comes first, then the skills are added. Apprenticeships also, by their very nature, come pre-packaged with a supportive network, the workplace. Skilled staff that also take on a mentoring role, and usually a very good staff to student ratio. In addition, employers will invest in the technology and systems that they need for their business, so trainees learn on the machinery and technology actually used. This takes some of the guesswork out of it for institutions and reduces their capital expenditure. Apprenticeships are back, but they've changed. Apprenticeships are now available to all ages, all genders, and a much wider range of industries. New Zealand, like Australia, has strong employment conditions, and acute skill shortages are reported in many industries covered by the ITOs. There are now as many industry trainees as there are university students. And society is beginning to question the cost and wisdom of keeping so much of our post-school education and training locked inside institutions. Employment may be high now, but downturns are inevitable. The future of tertiary education cannot just be an industrial model that tacks education onto school leavers. We need tertiary education to reach working adults through a system that supports constant upskilling, making the vision of seamless, lifelong learning a reality. How can we do this? Apprenticeships are beginning to be considered not just as the poster boy for the trades, but as an educational methodology for skills transfer at all levels. Many countries internationally now offer foundation-level apprenticeships delivered in partnerships between employers and schools, and universities are partnering up with employers to offer advanced apprenticeships. These ideas are in their infancy in New Zealand, although it seems like we have been talking about them for a very long time. Employment is high in New Zealand and our economy is steady. However, you don't have to scratch beneath the surface very far to find a story that is more grim. We have record numbers of young people who are off-grid. We call them NEETs, not in education, employment or training. We have an ageing population, which has its challenges for workplaces, as well as increasing the national health costs significantly. 1.2 million Kiwis have literacy and numeracy levels considered too low for the changing workplace. Our prisons are bursting. We have a housing crisis in Auckland. The number of homeless people is increasing across the country. Child poverty and domestic violence statistics are alarmingly high and on the rise. Many of our smaller provinces are struggling with gang issues, and many of our employers very naturally source their staff needs from abroad rather than take the risk of employing locals who may need remedial work. Social service professionals will tell you that the best way to support disenfranchised groups is through education and employment. VET is a happy marriage of both of these things and is therefore well placed to contribute. But we need a system-wide approach, and we need to reconsider our role and our current offerings. In the Skilling for Tomorrow paper, one suggestion is to move away from narrowly defined qualifications built around specific roles or tasks towards broader qualifications that share similar requirements for knowledge, skills, and attributes. I couldn't agree more. We also need to work together with our funders to support delivery in shorter bursts that can be offered throughout a person's working life and that don't penalise the institution or the individual if life happens and they need to take a break. And in addition, I believe we need to broaden our role to work together with employers at the interfaces to facilitate better supported transitions with schools, with tertiary providers, with job seekers, with career changers, with prisoners, both behind the wire and on release, and with migrants and refugee groups, so that we can utilise the talent pool we have for a more productive and resilient workforce. And that's, I think, about enough from me.